Here I am marking the size that I need, and I'm going to trace it so it's easy for me to see when I'm cutting out. Also, though, I am grading between a size 6 at the bust and a size 8 at the bottom. And so that is why you see me marking the top point and the bottom point, and then I'm using my ruler to make sure that it's a nice even line. And then I'm just going through and tracing the rest of it so it's easy for me to cut out. Now that I have all my pattern pieces cut out, I'm going to cut out my fabric. I'm going to start with the front and back dress piece, and I'm going to cut it on the fold. So I'm going to fold my fabric and lay it out. I am using washers from the hardware store, super cheap and a great pattern weight to hold this down while you're cutting. After you cut the pattern pieces out, make sure that you mark any notches. I like to just do a little snip into the fabric to mark where those are so we can use those to line up the pieces later. Now we're going to cut the strap and binding pieces. These need to be cut on the bias, so that means a 45-degree angle with the edge of the fabric. So you can see me measuring with the grain line arrows on the pattern piece with the edge of the fabric to make sure that it is straight and even. Now we're going to cut out our pocket pattern pieces, and we need 4 of these, 2 for each pocket. Here are all of my pattern pieces. I have my bodice pieces, then I have my pockets, followed by all of my straps. Now I need to cut out my interfacing pieces for the straps. I'm just using scraps here because I didn't have any full sheets, so I'm just kind of layering the pattern piece over a couple of pieces of interfacing. Now we're going to prepare our bodice pieces by stay stitching the neckline. We're going to go from the outside to the center and then again from the top to the bottom for the armholes. This is going to be a 1/4 inch stitch from the edge of the fabric just to help keep it from stretching. So when we go to add our binding piece, it will still line up exactly as it does now. Now we're going to iron those pieces onto our straps. So these need to line up in between the notches that we cut when we cut the pattern piece out. Now you want to make sure that you are pressing and holding and not just wiggling your iron over the top of it. It needs to melt the glue, so you really need to make sure that you're holding and giving it pressure. Now it's time to form the straps. So we are going to fold each edge in to meet at the center. This is going to be about a 1/4 inch fold, and then we're going to iron it down all the way. Once we have that ironed, we are going to fold the strap in half so that we are enclosing the raw edges on the inside. Now it's time to attach the binding piece to the neckline. You're going to attach it right side of the binding to the wrong side of the neckline. And now we're going to sew that down by stitching in the fold of the binding. Now we have that sewn, we're going to trim down this seam. This is called grading. You can see that seam allowance is much smaller, which will make it easier for us to fold this over and encase all of those raw edges. Here I am pressing that binding down so that it is nice and easy to sew when it is time. When we are stitching down this binding, you want to be very careful and go very slow because you are trying to sew as close to the folded edge as you possibly can. Now we are going to finish the edges of our pockets so that they don't fray. The way to finish the edge is by using a zigzag stitch. So you can see here, you're going to zigzag over the edge of the fabric, catching the edge so that it keeps it from fraying. Now, there are other ways to do this as well. You can also use a serger if you have one, and I will show you what that looks like here in just a second. Here's what the edge would look like if I used a serger to finish it. Now it's time for us to attach the pockets to the dress. So I'm going to look for where I have my notches that I cut, and I'm going to line my pocket pieces up with those notches. Now it's time to sew those pockets on. I am going to make sure that I'm backstitching at both ends and that I have my pockets right sides facing the right side of my bodice pieces. Now that the pocket is sewn on, we're going to go ahead and finish the whole side seam. I used a serger to finish mine, but you can use that same zigzag stitch we used on the pocket just a minute ago. Next, I'm going to go in and iron the seam allowance towards the pocket. This is going to help keep the pocket a little bit more hidden in the dress, and we're going to understitch this next. To understitch this pocket, we're just going to sew really close to the seam on the pocket. This is going to help tack down that seam allowance so it's not flopping around. Now it's time to sew the sides of the dress together. I'm going to lay the top on top of the bottom, matching up both sides and pockets. Once everything is matched up, I'm going to go ahead and pin everything or clip everything so it doesn't shift while I am sewing. Now it's time to start making the straps. I'm going to sew the short ends of the straps together at a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Then we're going to trim that seam allowance down so it's not so bulky. Now we're going to clip that to the armhole with the right side of the binding to the wrong side of the armhole. And then we're going to stitch it the same way we did our neckline, and we're going to trim down that extra seam allowance so it's not as bulky when we fold over the binding. Here I am folding over that binding so that it covers all of our raw edges, and then once I have this all folded, I'm going to iron this down, and then we're going to stitch along the edge. Time for a hem. I'm going to do a 1/4 inch hem, so I'm going to use my seam gauge to make sure that it is a 1/4 inch, and then I'm going to fold this another 1/4 inch and iron it one more time. Now that I have folded this twice, I'm going to go back to my machine and I'm going to sew this down. And once you have completed your hem, your dress is done. So here's the dress all finished. There are some things that I would change about it. And I do plan on making those changes, and then I will make a video about those. One of the things I would change about this is I need to shorten the straps, really by about this much, quite a bit. I shorten them probably about an inch or so to hold all of this up. This pattern is drafted for somebody who is 5'6". I am 5'2", but I didn't make any modifications because I wanted to see how this fit just straight out of the pack since I had never made it before. So that is something I'm going to do, is I'll take the straps off and fix that. I also need to raise the pockets because right now they are like way too low. So I think what I'm actually going to do is seam rip the dress apart and then recut it out after making some modifications, which I will talk about in another video. But she's cute. I think it's got a lot of potential, and I'm really excited for where this dress is gonna go. Thanks for coming along to my very first sew along. I hope that you make this, and I can't wait to see your guys' examples and the ways that you interpret this pattern. See ya.